Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second live stream of 2021. We're thrilled that you're here joining us today. We have a great talk lined up. And of course, to give you a little look at what's coming up, we have next week a fantastic look at what happened to the US diplomats in China and in Cuba with microwave power assaults on them. And of course, grave illnesses among those diplomats. We're going to be hearing from two experts on that. The first is Idil, and I have to look up his last name to get it right, Idil Shamiloglu, who is a professor at UNM, who came up with the initial theory that microwave power was in fact the result or the cause of the illnesses. And then we're also going to hear from James Giordano, who is a specialist in neurology and biochemistry. He's a professor at Georgetown University, does a number of different things with the US government, and was the first doctor to look at the diplomats to try to assess what indeed had happened. And of course, it'll be moderated by the one and only Vicki Huddleston, who served, as many of you know, as the head of the US interest section in Cuba. And she, of course, has stayed quite up to date on all the things happening in Cuba related to this attack. The week following, on the 28th of January, we feature Dr. Todd Greentree, the one and only, who will be talking all about Biden's foreign policy priorities, of which I think we can all agree there are legion. And then on February 2nd, and we announced this yesterday in our digest, we're putting on a special talk with the Santa Fe Institute, and that is called Cascading Conflict, What is the Science of Violence? And we will have the amazing Rachel Kleinfeld moderating. She's certainly one of the great authorities living in our fine town, and she'll be interviewing, among other folks, the president of Santa Fe Institute to talk about all this amazing research that's gone on, tracking armed conflict around the world, and really deciphering some of the patterns. This right now is only available to our members at the $150 yearly due and above. We will be making this available to the general public, assuming seats remain, on January 25th. So stay tuned. And lastly, before we turn over to today's speakers, we will be launching our Great Decisions discussion program that will launch on February 9th. All details will be coming, and for those of you who haven't done it before, there's a discussion booklet that we all read in advance. There's a video we all watch in advance. And then when you come to the webinar, we'll have a presenter, we'll have some snappy, interesting dialogue about what's going on, and then we will turn to you for your questions and thoughts and comments about the topic at hand. So with all of that said, let me now bring in today's two speakers and wish a fine good morning to, first to Joseph Whipple. Good morning, Joe, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Let me read Joe's bio really quickly. So Joe's a former CIA officer who had a 30-year career in the CIA as an operations officer in the National Clandestine Service. He served overseas as an operations officer and operations manager in Bonn, West Germany, Guatemala City, Luxembourg, Madrid, Mexico City, Vienna, and Berlin. He's currently a professor of the practice of international relations at Boston University. And boy, I wish I could take your class. Sounds like you've got quite a few things to say.
Well, I put a lot of students to sleep, thank you, and so if you suffer from insomnia, you would love my class.
I doubt it. And of course, joining Joe on the stage this morning is Valerie Flame. Welcome, Valerie. Great to see you again.
Hi, good morning, Sandy.
And Valerie, of course, we all know well that she is a writer, a spy novelist, a former CIA officer, and has done many fascinating things in her life and career. So welcome to the both of you. I look forward to the conversation. And folks out there, enter your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll get to them in about 40 or 45 minutes or so. So over to the two of you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. A delight to be here today and a pleasure to be doing this with Joe Whipple, who is such a deeply respected and, may I say, legendary CIA colleague of mine. When we were both in the CIA, Joe was at least 1,000 levels above where I was. So to be able to do this is quite a treat for me. So thank you for allowing this to happen. We were joking around. We don't know really what we're going to be talking about since there's not much going on. Just kidding. I'm going to kick off by asking Joe. Next week, next Wednesday, in 6 days, January 20th in the afternoon, President Joe Biden will be sitting down with his national security team in the Situation Room in the White House, place I'm sure you've been, Joe, as have I. What three things are at the top of his list in terms of threats, national security concerns, should Biden and his team be looking at?
Well, I think the first thing that's going to happen is kind of maybe a stabilization process, both in diplomacy and intelligence. A renewed emphasis on professionalism, and that's you're getting kind of a little bit. That's not really. You'll say, well, that's really not policy. It really isn't. But if anything, that's probably what the intelligence community and the diplomatic service has really suffered under during the last 4 years. It is a focus that is, one thing one day, and then it's another focus the next day, and it's it's being hard on Russia, but easy on Putin. It's North Korea, then it's China, then it's relations with NATO. So I think first of all, it's going to be a great big stabilization process. Let's all get on the same page. And I think the thing you can't forget about President Biden or the President-elect Biden is his forte is foreign affairs. He has read intelligence. He likes that. He likes that thing, and he understands it. And he's also, what people forget, he's very tough. Mm-hmm. And I think to have a president who is, I think the president has to be tough. Let's put it just that way, because of his office. I think big challenge, biggest challenge of all, I think, is climate change, which sounds strange when coming from an intelligence officer. But I think of, intelligence as being strategic and long-term. And there's a really strong intelligence element in climate change. It essentially got the first DNI, Senator Coates, fired, as well as others who were criticized. I think stabilizing relations with longtime allies in Asia and Europe is going to be really, really important, trying to reestablish American credibility. Mm-hmm. I think somehow there has to be, I think China is obviously, just a huge issue, and somehow it has to be formalized and made into something that makes sense again. So I think you've got China, where there's been kind of an on and off type of thing, and there are big intelligence issues with China. What are their intentions? Which way do they want to go? How are they going to go technologically? There's a huge counterintelligence issue with China, because they engage extensively in espionage operations, not only here, but in the rest of the world. And I think, the new administration, its big challenge is getting ourselves, allies in Asia, Japan, South Korea, allies in Europe, on the same page regarding China. So the Middle East, I would hope, we tend to make, in the Middle East, we tend to have good guys and bad guys. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of trouble figuring out who the good guys are, other than the people who are reading Haaretz, but that's, I don't know what, that's a minority of the Israeli population. I think some balancing, he's certainly going to try and, get into another agreement with Iran, which probably cannot be the same agreement that the previous administration, the Obama administration, signed on to, because sanctions have created all kinds of dislocations for the Iranians. How much support would another agreement have among the Iranians? But I think our objective, certainly in the Middle East, is to have, as good a relations as you can with all those countries who are all in some shape or form authoritarian type of countries. The intelligence issues there are enormous. I think Turkey's really important. So we need a lot of sources on this area of the world telling us what is going on, so that we're better able to understand the interests of others in order to coordinate them with our interests and come to agreements that make for a more peaceful and stable world as the world has to take on this climate change issue.
Absolutely. Well, you set the table, there's many priorities all at the same time, right? And it seems a bit daunting. So let me take pieces of it. You've opened up so much. Let me start with this, though, drilling down a little bit into our old organization in the CIA. Biden has appointed former diplomat Bill Burns to be head of the CIA. I don't know Bill personally, but I know that he is highly respected. And typically, I think those in the CIA look a little sideways at our counterparts in state, but that probably doesn't hold for Bill, just because he has such an enormous breadth of experience, including intelligence, throughout his career. What do you know him? What do you think of him? And how is he going to raise morale in the intelligence community that has just been beaten down over the last 4 years?
Well, I think if anyone can do it, it would be someone like him. I don't know him personally, but have been following him and his writings for some period of time. I mean, this guy, he seems to be a thinker and a leader. And it's not unusual. I mean, the MI6 has had former diplomats heading it. The French DGSE has. In the German intelligence service, they always have the #2 guy is a diplomat. And so I think it'll really be good to have someone who's able to focus on the needs of policymakers. And actually, intelligence analysts and operations officers often know better, what policymakers need than necessarily policymakers, because we're into that.
That's true. What could he do to raise morale, though, in that?
Yeah, I think communication. He's just got to constantly communicate with the people in the agency, both here as well as overseas. So I think communication is important. Often enough, what is lacking is that communication, especially when it gets to issues and problems that we may have had in the past, that someone doesn't come out and explain, what is the kind of basic truth of what we're doing. And if mistakes are made, then recognize them and try to, solve them or alleviate them. And I think that's traditionally been missing. But I think someone like Mr. Burns is going to be terrific. One other last comment that I think is there's an interesting tradition here. When President Obama became president, he put someone stronger in as the DCIA than the DNI.
Yeah.
And I think he did that on purpose. I mean, the guy, he is a constitutional lawyer after all. He knows the law. And I think he did that because he understood that CIA is actually the president's instrument. As Senator Moynihan once said, Jimmy Carter woke up this morning and found out it's his CIA. And,
I never quite understood what the DNI is supposed to be doing. It was, to my mind, a knee-jerk reaction to 9/11 attacks. Oh, we need to superimpose another bureaucratic layer. So there's about, I don't know, now maybe it's 2,500 people under the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, that oversee the 17 different intelligence agencies. What they do, I don't know. I thought that's what the CIA's mission was to oversee the 17 intelligence agencies and report to the president.
Well, after 9/11, what happened in Congress, and this is things that do happen in Congress, there is that viewpoint, do something.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, just do something.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I were to come to Senator Collins, who was, the manager of the bill through the Senate, and I said, this doesn't make any sense. You just needed to give the DCI, more authority to organize the intelligence community. She'd look at me and she'd say, have there been any terrorist attacks in the U.S. in the last 18 years, 19 years? And I'd say, well, no. And she'd say, well, there you go. It has a coordination function that probably has some value. And then, of course, the interesting thing is that, it is going to be the DNI, Ms. Haynes, who's going to go down to the White House with the president's daily brief.
Uh-huh.
Now, will she take along, Mr. Burns? I think it wouldn't be a bad idea.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah, but I think it's going to remain that way. I certainly knew very well the previous DNI Senator Coates because he was my ambassador in Berlin. Mm-hmm. And I think he certainly did the best he could under those circumstances. But you've now got a president who wants to listen to intelligence.
Yeah, yeah. Imagine
he's not going to jump out of the window because he hears something he doesn't like.
No, I do take some comfort in thinking, no matter what you think of politically, truly, Biden and his team, he has genuine experience and bringing back professionals into positions of real responsibility. And I do take some comfort in that. Let's turn now to what in ordinary days, of which we haven't had in a long time, be an absolutely enormous story. And that is the hack of the US government, there's no other way of putting it, by allegedly, most likely, the Russians. I always thought that while Putin has, very few resources, he plays his hand really well. Cyber hacks cost very little. And apparently, this is still actually going on. So who in the intelligence community was not paying attention? Who, because I know there's a whole cyber command, and how did this happen? And how is it still, I believe, still being perpetrated to a certain extent?
I think as far as I know regarding how it happened, and probably one of the reasons is that there's a lot of diffuse authorities out there. There's NSA, there's Cyber Command, there's the agency. My son himself is in cybersecurity, and one of the things he always says is, you're always so far behind in government on these type of issues. Probably because we're so dependent on the lowest bidder, so I think it's first of all, we don't know. At least I don't know what our capabilities are. Mm-hmm. Are our capabilities of the nature where they can get into, Russian systems, Chinese systems? I'm sure they've been in North Korean systems, but from what I read, I'm almost positive.
That's offensive capabilities.
Yeah, right.
Really, right. Our defensive
right.
Capabilities have been breached. We seem to be totally naked in terms of cybersecurity.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly that's going to be a big challenge of this next administration. Probably a matter of getting organized. Regarding the Russians, that really fascinates me, and it fascinates me from something that you said, that they play a weak hand very well.
Yeah.
But they have been engaged in espionage for a long period of time. Going back to the Tsarist realm, to the Soviet Union. I was at a Senate hearing once in which this was in 2005, in which the chairman said, "Why are there so many Russian intelligence officers in Washington?" Had nothing to do with the agency. It was at a counterintelligence site. I couldn't resist. I said, they're not just here. They're in Ljubljana, they're in Kuala Lumpur, they're in Montevideo, because they believe it gives them advantages, And going back a little bit to the new leadership in CIA, their leadership doesn't change all that often.
Right.
There's the example of Marcus Wolf in East Germany doing this for 3 decades, and so on. You've never run into a Russian intelligence officer who didn't speak the language of the country it was in, who just doesn't go 2-3 years and so on. So the Russians are focused.
Longer term view. Americans are not very good at that, and over the last couple decades, our intelligence has been, I would say, increasingly infused by a politicization, which we like not, if you would to ask a CIA analyst, do they politicize their intelligence, they'd rather chew off their arm.
Right.
But look at what, as I know up close and personal, what happened around the Iraq War. And that has, I think, only increased. So some things need to be put into place, some norms need to be reinforced that really put up that firewall between policy and intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of that is a matter of stability and expertise. I mean, we've got to honor expertise more, not only in that area, but generally in our country. And not just a matter of in the intelligence service, but in the diplomatic service, and the Russians do play a weak hand very well. The Chinese play a strong hand very well.
Yes. I'll come back to that. But first, can we talk just a little bit? Can we light on something that is near and dear to my heart, that I always counted as the #1 existential threat, but has, of course, been what you talked about earlier, climate change has added to that. But the 2 existential threats now are nuclear and climate change. So looking for a little bit in this talk on the nuclear issues. So under President Trump, it seems all the guardrails that have been built up over decades of bilateral, primarily multilateral talks with the Russians and others, the INF, the Iran nuclear treaty, open skies, they have all gone away in the interest so-called of this America First policy. And it's something I feel, this is my whole career. I worked on this, nuclear counterproliferation. It's still there. It's not going away. The notion of terrorists acquiring nuclear capability of some sort, even radiation, is terrifying. So you touched on this a little bit, but please expand a little bit more. Does Biden have a chance to reconstitute the Iran nuclear deal, or after the assassination of that Iran military leader, I guess it was about this time last year, and the continuing souring of relations, and not to mention with Putin, the open skies agreement, I think there's about 3 seconds left to see if we can re-up that. Where are we? What should what should Biden and his team be saying? This is what we have to do first, right away.
You bring up an issue that is surprisingly often enough in the background, because nothing has happened yet regarding some kind of nuclear event. But it's going to be a very bad day for the world if even one of those damn things, goes off.
Forget it.
First on the Iran deal, I think he's very much interested in going back into an agreement with Iran. It's going to be tougher because of what they've suffered under sanctions. He's going to try and get an extended time period, some kind of control on their missiles. But in return, we have to give a lot. It's the old Richard Nixon quote about what do they want, what do we want,
Right.
in order to come to an agreement. And that's where intelligence is so important. What are their interests? Where, how far will they go? What can an agreement look like? Regarding both Russia and China, there should be ongoing discussions and negotiations over all of the issues that you mentioned, whether it's INF or open skies, salt. Probably having another salt agreement is an excellent idea.
For them, Joe, what's in it for them? How do you bring, how do you say, listen, there's a new day in Washington. We're serious. We need to sit down and hash this out.
I mean, certainly one good thing is try to appeal to reason, in the sense that if we get good deals, it is something that will help the center, in this country continue on for an extended period of time beyond 4 years, no matter who becomes president.
But speaking from personal experience, there was vociferous and loud and sustained and really, really vitriolic opposition from the right in this country, particularly from the Zionist communities, against the Iran nuclear deal, because they saw it as ultimately harming Israel. And of course, Trump has really played in, he really embraces them as part of his supporters, moving the embassy to Jerusalem and babying Netanyahu and so forth. So, I just have to say, I don't think the United States can be viewed as good offices anymore for ways to help nurture negotiations in the Middle East. But having said that, how does the Biden team reach out and begin to mollify that faction, if that's even possible, or just say we're not even going to give you any oxygen whatsoever. We're going to go ahead with this deal because we think it, or try to reconstitute it as we think it's in our best interest.
Well, I think some things are going to be. I can't see, President Biden moving the embassy back to Tel Aviv. I think it's in Jerusalem. It's in Jerusalem for good. But this period, I think the Netanyahu period may be just about over. That'll be a help. It's always interesting that most, especially the retired intelligence leadership in Israel, they all supported the Iran deal. They thought the Iran deal was a pretty good deal, simply because I think they very much believe in dialogue and in talking to all the players in the Middle East. Some of the issues we've seen, are positive, that there's a greater recognition that Israel is here to stay. But at the same time, there still is a need to have some kind of two-state, solution. But you got to be skeptical of that. And what will eventually take place? Will it be a unitary state? So you can look at some of these things that very pessimistically, like another expulsion of people, which I think would be disastrous, and so on. But certainly the Israelis are capable of taking care of themselves, as we've noticed very easily.
They are, but having said that, they are the only thing close to democracy in that part of the world. So it is important to provide them.
That's right. I mean, the rest are, as I like describing them, as family businesses. Even if it's just the Mullah family business or the Sisi family business, some of the family businesses we like, and some are not so bad. I think the Jordanian king is probably as good as you're going to find. But these are all family businesses. And by the way, I don't think the Arab Spring is over. I think that area of the world is going to blow up again, because I don't think people want to live that way forever.
No, under such autocratic rule.
Yeah, exactly. And when it happens, this is always going to be interesting. Everybody's going to be surprised, surprised. How come we didn't know about this? Well, I couldn't tell you the date it's going to happen, but I just cannot imagine that in a modern and more technical and more globalized, and sophisticated world that these guys, these family businesses, including the Mullah family business,
Yeah.
going to able to preserve itself. I just don't believe it. It's going to happen.
Let's turn our gaze back from overseas, back home to the events of last week, which unprecedented is such an overused term. But I happen to be, I was out of internet cell phone service until all my emails started coming in on January 6th, and I learned what was happening in the Capitol. And like every other American, absolutely horrified and shocked. That said, so this isn't what happened. Isn't necessarily foreign intelligence, but I have to believe that his national security team is going to be looking at domestic militias, these far right groups, white supremacists, that even as we speak right now are debating and at a decision point of what are they going to be doing in the coming days and to prevent the inauguration of Joe Biden as our next president. So, and we haven't heard much from the FBI. Investigations are ongoing of how the billions of dollars that have been spent on security since 9/11 was breached by a guy in a Viking helmet hat for wearing a bikini. I mean, I'm laughing, and yet, if that intent, the intent was there. I mean, this was clearly premeditated. It wasn't a joyride, and so. Let's talk about that for a little bit, because it really, these domestic groups that we are looking at and the conspiracy that behind them, the QAnon and so forth, at least two of whom are members of Congress. This is going to affect our standing in the world, our intelligence, our security, everything. How do we begin to put our arms around it?
Well, one issue that you note, I'll just lay aside, and that becomes, social issues, educational issues, some things that are, really uniquely American, the influence of evangelical fundamentalism, and so I just got to, because that we'll be talking until 6 o'clock this evening on some of those issues, as you well know. Almost all countries in the world, democratic rule, we believe in a trinity, right? Democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And almost all countries like that, have what is a domestic intelligence collection agency. Mm-hmm. It's MI5 in Britain, it's the DCRI in France, it's the BFE in Germany, and Denmark has this, and Switzerland has this, and so on and so forth. And essentially, they collect intelligence on people who, in some way, threaten the constitution of their state. Mm-hmm. And we leave that to the FBI, which there was a discussion after 9/11 to create a domestic intelligence collection agency like MI5, which if they collect, intelligence that would lead to a prosecution, they'll hand it over to Scotland Yard to do the rest. Can the FBI do this?
Are they capable?
Yeah, it is a police organization. It's essentially, people in the FBI get promoted for arresting people. Now, they have made a pretty huge transition since 9/11 to investigate terrorist type of activities. But in the whole area of, some of these organizations which are hostile to the Constitution of the United States, and, what are the inhibitors to, ferreting them out? Some of them are, people who go out in the woods probably in New Mexico and shoot at things and think the commies are coming, but they go home and they're not a threat at some.
Right. How do you discern those that will act on it and show
Right.
up with zip ties at the Capitol versus someone who's just throwing stuff at their TV?
Right, exactly. I mean, the former part you will always basically have. I don't know. And there was actually a time when police authorities were able to investigate these more easily. And so you're also dealing, with, trying to understand these organizations, the conspiratorial nature of the organizations, and also protecting the rights of citizens, that
Right.
are not engaged in any hostile endeavors. But there is I think a real need for the political policymaker on the state level to understand these organizations and to go through a process in which you can keep an eye on them, like we do on people who are potential terrorists. Well, they are potential. They are kind of. I mean, that was an act of terrorism, I find, a week ago. But that, that kind of also goes a little bit against the American grain,
Exactly. And I have to say this for me, Joe, this is where I'm really a big question for me that I've been contemplating over the last 2 years has been a very broad question of how does a liberal democracy function or at least attempt to increase its health in a world where there's a pandemic of disinformation, of conspiracy theories. And you have, for instance, one of the women who was killed, I don't know, breaching a window or a door at the Capitol, was as an Air Force veteran. She truly believed in what this baseless conspiracy theory of QAnon had been, she had been completely brainwashed. So there's an issue of mental health, which is a whole other conversation of how that's stigmatized in our country. But anyway, she completely abandoned, I'm using this one woman, but it's multiplied by, many, of course. She's completely abandoned her own critical thought abilities, has embraced this conspiracy so much so that she breached the Capitol thinking that was the best because her president and she'd been told that the election had been stolen. So how does our democracy in a world of deep fakes and artificial intelligence where you can get anyone on the internet saying anything or make people believe that to be the case, how do we move forward?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, are these freedoms unlimited? Are they absolute that we have? Now, in most European countries, including the couple that I was assigned to, it is illegal to question the Holocaust. You cannot, you can, in the privacy of your home, obviously you can. But if I get out on a street corner in Munich and say, well, this never happened, or it's much less than, I can get a couple of years in jail, because they have decided that on this issue, there is a standard of truth that, you literally cannot question in public or in print. And, how to get to that,
Won't that infringe upon what we hold dear as our First Amendment rights? As a Congresswoman stood in the well of the House yesterday, when they censored.
Yeah, well, that is very, because the Germans used to come to us and say, can't you stop this printing of neo-Nazi literature in the United States that gets sent to Germany? And we just look at them, First Amendment rights. No, you can't. And so on. But the windmill there is a big one because it's a situation not where 10% of the American population believes somehow that the election was a fraud, although I guess the last one was not, instead of 40%. I mean, 40% of the population, believes in these type of things. And I think it is a matter of education and trying to communicate. And it's very rough. All you need to do is drive around the South sometime and listen to a combination of the evangelical and the radio talk stations to get an idea that, there are huge groups out there who believe in these conspiracy theories and that somehow someone is out there taking away something from them.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the nurturing, it feeds right into the nurturing of grievances.
Yeah.
And the sense that the pie is only so big and other people are taking their piece of the pie.
Right. So, I mean, I have no, immediate solution. I think education is important in this regard. And sometimes I wonder, what they're learning in school. And we have some grad students here. One woman, is from a part of Tennessee, and she says she goes back and she just, she's beside herself.
Well, that's because you're in that liberal elite East Coast, Boston, crime loving, Volvo driving place.
Well, actually, I've always surprisingly, Massachusetts is more conservative than you would think it might be. It's terribly disorganized, by the way. Boston is, and so on, and it's not, and we are in a sense in a bit of a bubble too. And it is good to, I mean, I do hear things from outside, which, and I still believe in individual responsibility and, you're responsible for yourself and, you have to work, people have to work. That's what people forget when they talk about socialism in Europe, well, everybody has to work.
Yeah.
Start out with that and they forget, oh, really? People have to, people have to work.
Yeah.
So you're right.
Let me ask one last question before I think we open it up for broader questions from the audience, which is, does the United States have any soft power left anymore? Remember, we used to talk about that all the time. In sort of the Cold War days, we had our military, but what really was our secret weapon was our soft power. Do we have any left?
Well, that's surprisingly, I think we do. And certainly this is just from my contacts with foreign people over Christmas when we get those Christmas cards coming in. And, I know you got a lot of problems, but, they still, very much, like coming to America. We have some things that are still, go for us. We're very welcoming to immigrants as compared to most places in the world. It's one of our real strengths.
Yes.
We're a very rich country, which is also one of our strengths. So I think we have a little bit, a lot of, and a lot of our culture or even lack of culture, dominates, the world. And, in spite of the fact that I remember about 15 years ago, one German woman said, "What kind of democracy have you guys got?" When we're talking about electors and a U.S. Senate and, my old home state of Wisconsin, which is terribly gerrymandered. I mean, it's almost disgusting, So I said, well, it's kind of unique. And that other question about change, I think the U.S. business community and U.S. corporate leadership is got to get into this thing on the culture here. So anyway, I think we still have some soft power, and I'm looking forward to my next trip.
Me too. Well, we have a number of questions here in the Q&A box, and for those of you out there who still have some questions, now is the time to type them in. I want to get into the cyber hack in a minute, but I think based on what you just said, there's a great question here from Alan Oliver that I want to ask, which is, with the massive polarization in Washington, D.C., how do we, and sorry, my screen's cut off here, how do we put foreign policy and intelligence back to a place where, quote, politics stops at the water's edge? Is this even possible, especially when foreign actors are busy manipulating domestic politics?
Yeah, that is, in my opinion, a great question, and it has a number of facets to it. The 2016 covert action by Russia to influence the election here was really nifty. It was a sophisticated operation, to me, showing how well they know us. Mm-hmm. They've taken the time to really know us, and so on. They also did very well on the Brexit operation in the UK. It's only a matter of a couple of percentage of the votes, although it's very hard to establish how much influence does an influence operation really have, so that's one part of it. We can protect ourselves by just basically publicizing what they're trying to do to us and knowing what they're trying to do to us. So that's one aspect of that. Otherwise, I think you're just going to have a lot more stability in, as far as intelligence is concerned. It will certainly last during the administration of Biden-Harris. If they're reelected, it will go through another administration. A lot depends on the Republican Party. Will it become a conservative party again, or a populist Trump party? Right now, it looks more like a populist Trump party. And if you ask me what that stands for, it basically stands for what's in the mind of Donald Trump on any particular day of the week, or even minute of the day. So I think that stability, professionalism, someone like Haynes and Burns, now they're really professionals. And they're strategic thinkers, and they're leaders, and they're honorable. I mean, that's really important in that job.
If I may add, it bothers me as an American, I'm not speaking from any partisan sense, but where you don't have, there's no intellectual heft whatsoever on the right. Then the conservative view, we have those that were fired up, the Lincoln Project, anyone but Trump. But on the right, the party Trump has just been parasitic on the Republican Party, to the point where it's sort of sucked out any sort of intellectual thought to policy and our place in the world and so forth. And this is not good. Because you don't have what we so aspire to, clash of ideas. You have a party that is beholden to a personality, and then on the left, the left has its own issues and extremism as well. But it's just completely vacant. And this to go ahead as the only superpower left on the globe, to be so conflicted and fractured does not bode well.
Well, let's talk about CIA for a second. A big picture question, and then a more narrow one. Given that one of the hallmarks of the Trump administration has been to challenge and upset and ultimately, erode our important alliances and friendships and so on abroad, how has that damage rippled across CIA? And then a follow-up, much more specific from the audience, which is, how will the CIA's relationships with foreign security services change under the new administration?
That's good. I would say that, especially on these transnational issues that Valerie and I have been talking about, like proliferation, terrorism, rogue state type of things, I don't think we're going to get very far unless we do it in coordination with other intelligence services. I mean, for instance, counterintelligence regarding, the Chinese and their operations. I don't see how we can do anything on our own. And there's, in a country like Britain or France or Germany or Japan, South Korea. I mean, they have thousands of people who are working on these particular issues. So it's really important to have good relations with them. And also, it's a little bit of an interesting sidelight on this. Often, when there's awful political relations between countries, the relations between security services can be actually not that bad. And even, a famous kind of very critical person of, on American foreign policy, the Swedish prime minister from the 70s and 80s, Palme, or Den Uyl in Holland, while they were very critical of US policy, on the security service level, it worked very well. Again, really important, have expertise, have language, have knowledge, and hang in there. Is what I would recommend, and that's often neglected.
I can't. The hardest jobs of the last 4 years has got to be an American representing U.S. interests abroad, because it was so change within 24 hours, and having to support that when you're an American, whether as a diplomat, an intelligence officer, a military officer, you are representing American interests and the commander in chief. You're not there as a diplomat or a Republican. And it's been so much harder over the last 4 years with this very impulsive, Twitter-driven president. Can you imagine being an ambassador and trying to explain, well, he didn't really mean that. What he really meant was this. And I know from our former colleagues in the CIA, they would just put their heads in their hand, because he really destroyed or did terrible damage, I should say, to some deep, long-term working relationships with our intelligence liaison partners, because he didn't understand it, his just sheer ignorance. And that, again, I have to go back. This is not a political statement, but just simply in terms of experience, Biden understands that. And what the question was, does politics stops at the water's edge? We might have our own internal debates about how to pursue a policy, but at least could we try to present a united front to our allies and our enemies?
Can you imagine being the U.S. ambassador to the UK, being asked to lobby the British government to get the British Open at the Trump-Turnberry course?
It's
or someone like Grinnell in Germany, who's meeting with this really populist right, and the Donald just absolutely hated Merkel. I mean, because
but he loved Grinnell. I thought Grinnell was a Trump supporter, so maybe that he didn't see it as a conflict of interest. He's like, yeah, whatever Trump wants.
Well, one of the things interesting, and I hope it happens, that we, I've had a lot of political ambassadors, and I've had some, and a couple of them have been pretty good because they did basically what their DCMs, advised them to do. But I hope we see more professionals in the foreign service as our ambassadors, because my experience with the professionals was really excellent. I mean, they're really top flight guys. And also, almost all the deputy chiefs of missions I worked with were just absolutely first class.
Because they're professional. Their career.
Yeah, their career. I mean, they know how to be diplomats. And they understand policy. Often they can think strategically, and a lot of them are really smart.
May the smart people come back and help us make our many mistakes. So I want to go into the cyber hack, because obviously this is part of a much broader cyber war that's been going on and will continue to go on. One thing I don't understand, and this builds on a question from one of our board members, Tom Johnson, is what is the effect of what just happened on things like our power grid or city power grids or water systems, air traffic control? We know that the hack happened, but what's the inside scoop on what it actually means?
To me, it means a warning that you have to be able to secure your systems But from their perspective, it probably means we can do this to you. And the other thing, I mean, I think very important is to get into negotiations, probably on a United Nations level and a bilateral level on what the ground rules are going to be, because, if they hack our systems at some time or other, it's going to be contingent on the President of the United States to show that we can do something to them that's not so nice. So before that all happens, we all have these capabilities, and we really don't. Sometimes I read these things about cyber, and I don't think the people who are writing the articles understand what they're saying. But at any rate, it's one of those areas that I think would be really, really important for negotiation.
Yeah, it sounds so quaint, but sort of like a Geneva Convention on cyber.
Absolutely.
Where certain ground rules are agreed to, whether that can be done. And as Joe says, that takes actual experience and patience and proper diplomatic tools to bring the stakeholders to the table. Now, Russia has, as we were saying, very weak hand that's well played. They have to say, what's in it for us, right? We've gotten a lot of mileage, way more than we ever anticipated from our cyber hacks. So why would we participate? But you should make a try at it, of course.
Well, I know one of the biggest challenges is sort of, where do you draw the line? What is an actual outright declaration of war in the cyberspace versus something that, you just sort of manage and retaliate in your own way? And it's a very complicated, complex, arena, obviously. So follow up on this. This is another question from our board member, Beth Sheridan, and her husband, Joe. And Joe's wondering, if the United States might be so far behind on cyber safety technology because the government is constrained to lowest price bids. Is it true that they have to select lowest cost and not best value?
I don't really have a real answer to a question like that because I'm not in that part of the world. But it does remind you of the story of the astronaut who's going to the moon, and he's asked, "What do you feel?" He says, "Well, I feel like I'm flying on a rocket ship from the lowest bidder," and so on. But certainly, what is true is that we're unable to move fast enough. In this complex of cyber, something I failed to mention, we're really going to have to pay people to do this stuff. And we're very much limited on federal scales and, cost of living in places like Washington, D.C. To pay the type of people we need to pay. Too many, the alternative to that, of course, is to give the work to contractors, right? Where the pay has no limits. And that's the way often government works. But the controls aren't there. The morale isn't there. That we're in this together isn't there. And I actually asked that question that when Mike Rogers was over there at Harvard giving, and he's into this cybersecurity. He's very good. He's a good guy. And so on. And I said, well, how are we going to pay these people? Well, it went on to another subject, and so on. But that's really important because these people have got to be really good. The private sector is obviously competing for them in a big way. So we've got to be able to, pay these people, and we've got to be able to move fast. Finally, I think when the healthcare law was initiated in the U.S., I think it was one of those cases where instead of going to someone who could have done it properly, these programs kept falling apart, and it wound up being a real, gave them basically a bloody nose when they were trying to institute this law. Had they been able to pay someone to really do this right in its initiation, it probably would have gotten a lot more support.
Joe's absolutely right. Can you imagine if a brilliant hacker and the only real incentive you have to have him or her come to work for the US government, NSA or CIA, is, because it's the right thing, because you'll be a good patriot, that only goes so far, versus making bank for a private contractor. And I know, Joe, you saw this too. After 9/11, the CIA was flooded with contractors because we had like 2 people that spoke Urdu in the initial days after 9/11. We're like, gee, we really need some, better foreign language speakers. So we relied heavily on contractors, which you need to do that at certain points for a surge. But the backlash to that is there, when it all goes south, and at points it always goes south, to whom is their loyalty? Who writes their checks? And that's a topic for a whole other thing, how much the US intelligence services have been served or supported by contractors.
One more question. I know we're just slightly over time, but this one I can't help but ask. Let's go inside Russia for just a minute and get some thoughts. We heard the news yesterday, and this is building on a comment from Ralph Hardy that, Alexei Navalny is in fact returning to Russia. What's your take on the opposition in Russia, on Putin's hold on power? Anything that is sort of behind the headlines of what's going on in that country?
He obviously got a good treatment in Germany. It was fascinating when he kind of disguised himself and talked to one of the security people who admitted what they had done. That's just really amazing. They have engaged in a couple of assassination operations, one in Berlin and the one that's more known in England. I think it's where can we go on from that type of thing? I think I think the biggest weakness in Russia, in addition to its economy, is simply that there's so much more information that the population of Russia has. I have a feeling that young people, especially in the major cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, they want to live like the people do in Berlin or Paris, And I think over the long term, we have to get the Russians into our security system. And I'm talking 50 years. I'm not talking, in this administration or the next administration. But somehow this extremely wealthy, probably the only country in the world that's wealthier than the United States, in theory, can be brought into, a normal security system and a normalization process. Now you could do some influence operations the reverse way. I think we might do some of those in, Radio Liberty and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that that's a suggestion on my part, but I personally believe that the Russians need to be brought around. Well, as long as Mr. Putin is there, that's going to have its limitations. But as bad as Putin is, he's not Stalin, he's not Khrushchev, and he's not Brezhnev. You can still talk to him. Well,
Thank you both so much. We could talk for the rest of the day. We have all kinds of topics we didn't get into. But Joe Whipple, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And Valerie, of course, thank you once again. I was trying to count up how many talks you've done and led for us over the years, but thank you so much. And
always a pleasure. Thank you, Sandy.
Take care.
Yeah, best of luck to both of you, and we'll see you all soon.
Good.
Terrific. Thank you.
Take care, Sandy. Bye-bye.
Bye.